My name is Rachel Carter, and this is the story of how I learned the hard way that family can be your greatest ally or your worst enemy. For over a decade, I dedicated my life to building something that was supposed to be ours. I transformed my family's struggling tech business from a modest repair shop into a thriving software enterprise worth millions. But success has a way of revealing people's true nature, even those you love the most. It all started back when Carter Tech was just a small, barely surviving computer repair shop that my dad, William Carter, had started nearly 20 years prior. He had poured everything into that business, and despite its constant struggles, it was his pride and joy. I spent my childhood watching him work long hours, fixing machines, and dealing with difficult customers, all while trying to keep the lights on. My older sister, Natalie, was the golden child, the one with the straight A's, the Ivy League degree, and Dad's unwavering admiration. She was smart, ambitious, and polished in a way I never was. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the one who stayed behind to help at the shop while earning a computer science degree at a local university. "Rachel, you're wasting your potential here," Natalie would say every time she visited home from college. "You should be out in the real world, working for a major tech firm, not stuck in a dying shop." She never saw what I did. While she was off learning about theoretical business strategies, I was in the trenches, figuring out what real customers needed. I spent my nights coding and experimenting, fixing broken systems, and identifying gaps in the market. One of those gaps became my first real breakthrough. During my final year of college, I developed a simple but effective inventory management software designed for small businesses. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was practical, affordable, and met a critical need. When I showed it to Dad, he was skeptical at first. "Who would even buy this, Rachel?" he had asked. But when the first local businesses started licensing it, his tune changed. I remember the way his expression softened, the flicker of pride in his eyes. "Maybe you're onto something, kiddo." That moment meant everything to me. If only I had known how fleeting it would be. Under my leadership, the business started to grow. I put in 14-hour days, 7 days a week, pouring my entire soul into turning Carter Tech into something bigger. While Natalie was climbing the corporate ladder at a high-profile consulting firm in New York, I was creating something tangible, something real. The tiny repair shop slowly transformed into a full-fledged software company. We expanded from local clients to national corporations. For the first time, we were making real money. My mother, Linda, watched me work with quiet concern. "You need a life outside of this, Rachel," she would say, gently placing dinner on my desk. "Don't let this consume you." But I couldn't stop. Maybe I was chasing success, or maybe I was still hoping to prove my worth, to show Dad that I was just as capable as Natalie, if not more. 5 years into our transformation, we hit our first million in annual revenue. That was when Natalie suddenly decided she was interested in the family business again. I'll never forget that family dinner. Natalie had flown home for the weekend, her usual confident smile in place. Over a table full of my mother's cooking, she made her grand announcement. "I think it's time I took my rightful place in the company," she declared, effortlessly commanding attention. "With my expertise in business strategy, we could scale Carter Tech into something even greater." Dad practically beamed. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We could use your expertise to take things to the next level." I sat there, my fork frozen mid-air. I could hardly process what was happening. The company I had built, my company, was suddenly being handed to Natalie, like some sort of inheritance. I swallowed my frustration and played along, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she would contribute something meaningful. But I should have known better. Within weeks, Natalie was named co-CEO, despite having zero experience in our industry. Dad insisted it was a good move for the company's image, that having someone with her credentials would attract investors. So, while I remained in charge of product development and operations, she took over marketing and investor relations. At first, I told myself that it didn't matter. I could keep building, keep innovating, and she could handle the business side. But as the years went on, the cracks in that illusion began to show. The company grew, but so did the tension. I kept creating. I developed new software, strengthened client relationships, and expanded our services. Meanwhile, Natalie became the face of the company. She gave interviews, accepted awards for her entrepreneurial success, and took credit for innovations she had nothing to do with. By the time Carter Tech hit $50 million in revenue, the power struggle had become impossible to ignore. Natalie began excluding me from key meetings, making major decisions without consulting me, and slowly but methodically pushing me to the sidelines of my own creation. Then came Dad's 60th birthday party, the night everything changed. The party, of course, was Natalie's idea. She rented out a grand ballroom in one of the city's most expensive hotels and invited all our business associates. It wasn't a birthday party, it was a networking event disguised as one. That was Natalie's style. Everything had to serve a purpose. I arrived early to help with preparations, dressed in a simple black dress. The moment she spotted me, she gave me that familiar look of disapproval. "Couldn't you have put in more effort?" she whispered sharply. "These are important people, Rachel." I ignored her and focused on greeting guests, as I always did. The room quickly filled with executives, investors, and family friends. Natalie moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands and flashing her perfectly rehearsed smile. Dinner was served, and just as I was starting to relax, Natalie stood up, tapping her champagne glass for attention. I expected a typical toast, maybe something sentimental about Dad, a few nostalgic childhood memories. Instead, she dropped a bomb that shattered everything. "As we celebrate Dad's 60th birthday," she began, her voice confident and commanding, "I think it's the perfect time to announce some exciting changes at Carter Tech." My stomach twisted. "Changes," she continued, her words slicing through the room like a blade. "The board has agreed that the company needs unified leadership to move forward." Board meetings? What board meetings? "For too long, we've been held back by outdated thinking and resistance to change," she went on, her gaze locking onto mine. Then came the final blow. "That's why, effective immediately, I will be taking over as sole CEO. It's time for certain elements that no longer serve our growth to step aside." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I sat there, frozen, as Natalie carried out my corporate execution in front of our entire network. And then, with a voice dripping in false sympathy, she delivered the killing shot. "Rachel has done an adequate job maintaining our legacy systems, but in today's fast-moving industry, we need vision, we need excellence, and frankly, Rachel, you're just not cut out for this level of business." I turned to Dad. "Say something, stand up for me," but he just nodded along, a proud smile on his face. Mom, on the other hand, kept her eyes down, her hands trembling slightly on the table. Natalie wasn't done. "Rachel," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room, "you are worthless in today's business world. It's time for you to step aside gracefully." Hundreds of eyes turned to me. I could feel the pity, the judgment, the unspoken agreement with her words. I slowly stood, the sound of my chair scraping against the floor cut through the silence like a gunshot. Without a word, I walked over to Dad's table and placed a small, wrapped package in front of him. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said quietly. Then, with my head held high, I walked out. Natalie thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming next. The night of the party, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even scream into my pillow, even though every part of me wanted to. Instead, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the awards, the patents, and the framed newspaper articles that bore my name, the very proof of what I had built, what I had created. And yet, in one night, Natalie had taken it all, or at least, she thought she had, because what she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I had spent the last 10 years learning far more than just software development. I had been learning how business worked, how power worked, and most importantly, how to protect myself. By 3 a.m., I had finished what I needed to do. I hit send on one final email, leaned back in my chair, and let out a slow, steady breath. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. I arrived at Carter Tech early the next morning, before anyone else. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat in my office, and waited. At exactly 9 a.m., the glass doors swung open, and in strode Natalie, dressed in one of her immaculate power suits, followed closely by Dad. They were both smiling, looking triumphant, like two people who had won. That wouldn't last long. Natalie spotted me immediately and stopped short, her expression shifting from confidence to annoyance. "Rachel?" she said, her voice laced with feigned surprise. "I thought after last night, you'd have the dignity to stay home." I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. "Just tying up some loose ends, sister. But since you're here, we should probably talk about the company's future." Dad stepped forward, his tone firm. "There's nothing to discuss, Rachel. Natalie's in charge now. The board has already approved it." "Ah, yes, the board." I tapped my tablet, and the conference room's main monitor lit up behind me. Let's talk about that. Dad and Natalie turned toward the screen. Their smug expressions faltered. I pulled up a document and zoomed in for emphasis. You see, while Natalie was busy planning speeches and throwing parties, I was actually building this company, and there are a few things you both seem to have forgotten. I swiped again, and another document appeared. First, let's discuss ownership. I looked directly at Dad. 10 years ago, when we incorporated, you split the company evenly, 25% to me, 25% to Natalie, and you kept the remaining 50%. But 3 years ago, when we needed capital for expansion, you sold me 6% of your shares. I paused, watching as realization dawned on his face. Remember that day, Dad? You were too busy attending Natalie's award ceremony to handle the negotiations yourself, so you signed the paperwork without reading it carefully. The color drained from his face. Natalie's fingers tightened around the edge of the conference table. That's impossible, she whispered. Dad would never, but he did. I interrupted smoothly, clicking to the next slide, and then I dropped the hammer, which means as of this moment, I hold 51% of Carter Tech. For a long, tense second, nobody moved. Then Natalie's perfect, composed mask cracked. You, she started, but her voice faltered. Dad sat down heavily in a chair, rubbing his temple, but I wasn't done. I swiped again, and the next screen filled with legal filings. Now let's talk about Carter Tech's most valuable asset, our core software. You know, the product that generates 80% of our revenue? Natalie swallowed hard. Yeah, I said, my voice calm. It's not actually owned by Carter Tech. I zoomed in. It's owned by my separate company, Novatech Solutions, LLC. Carter Tech only has a licensing agreement, which, by the way, expired about 10 minutes ago. Dad's head snapped up. The renewal papers, he murmured. The ones I asked you to sign last week? I finished for him. Yeah, you didn't read those either. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Across the table, Natalie's face was pure rage. You, underhanded, she started, but I held up a hand. Careful, sister. You might want to hear the rest before you finish that sentence. I swiped one last time, revealing dozens of emails from clients. While you were busy celebrating my graceful exit last night, I was informing our clients about the leadership change. You see, most of them have personal loyalty clauses in their contracts. They signed with Carter Tech because of me, my expertise, my track record. Natalie's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, frantically scrolling through her inbox. Would you like to know how many have already triggered their termination clauses? I tilted my head slightly. Silence. Through the glass walls, I could see employees gathering, whispering, checking their own emails. Carter Tech was falling apart in real time. Natalie's voice was barely a whisper now. You can't do this. I exhaled slowly, leaning back. You mean I can't take back what's mine? I asked. You thought you could just take over because you have an MBA and Dad's approval? You thought you could humiliate me in front of everyone and walk away unscathed? I stood, smoothing out my dress. So here's the deal, I said, keeping my tone even. Option 1, I walk away with my shares, my software, my clients, and my employees. Carter Tech becomes an empty shell, and you two can explain to your investors why the company's valuation just plummeted to zero overnight. Dad's face aged 10 years in 10 minutes. And option 2? He asked weakly. I folded my arms. Option 2, both of you resign. I let the weight of my words settle before continuing. I take full control of Carter Tech. You both keep your shares, as silent partners. You receive dividends, but you have no say in operations. Natalie gets a severance package and glowing references for her next job, somewhere far away from here. Natalie's entire body was shaking now. You planned this, she hissed. You were just waiting for the right moment to stab us in the back. I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, Natalie, I spent 10 years being a good daughter, a good sister, and the entire time, you both took me for granted. I only planned this. I checked my watch. About 12 hours ago, after you called me worthless in front of everyone we know. Silence. Then my phone buzzed. Another client termination notice. Time's running out, I said softly. What's it going to be? The next hour was a blur of lawyers, signatures, and whispered negotiations. By noon, I sat alone in what was now my office. Carter Tech belonged to me, but the victory felt hollow. I had won, but at what cost? As I sat there, staring out over the city skyline, I heard my mother's voice in my head. Did it have to end this way? I wasn't sure, but I did know one thing. I wasn't done yet. By noon, it was done. Natalie was gone. Dad had signed the resignation papers in silence, his hands shaking slightly as he handed them back to me. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time in years. But he said nothing. I didn't expect him to. Natalie had stormed out after signing, her perfect composure shattered. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look at me. And just like that, Carter Tech was mine. I sat alone in the CEO's office, the office that should have been mine from the start, staring out over the city. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt empty. The fallout came fast. News of the power shift spread through the industry like wildfire. Some people whispered about it in hushed voices. Others, not so much. Did you hear? Rachel Carter just ousted her sister. Brutal. But honestly, good for her. Guess Natalie wasn't as untouchable as she thought. Investors called, some wary, some eager. Clients reaffirmed their contracts. Developers who had been on the fence about leaving decided to stay. And then, there was Mom. She showed up that evening, just as the sun was setting, stepping quietly into my office. I hadn't seen her since the party. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Did it have to end this way? She asked softly. I let out a slow breath, staring down at my desk. They gave me no choice, I said, my voice steady but quiet. Mom walked over, taking a seat across from me. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she reached out and placed her hand over mine. I know, she whispered. And that was all. No lectures, no disappointment, just quiet understanding. Maybe she had seen it coming long before I had. Maybe she had just been waiting for the inevitable. Either way, it didn't change what had happened. Natalie didn't go quietly. Within a week, she resurfaced, loudly. She made the rounds in business circles, spinning the narrative in her favor. I was forced out by my own sister, blindsided after I worked so hard to elevate the company. Rachel never understood the business side of things. Without me, Carter Tech won't survive. It's heartbreaking to be betrayed by family like that. She painted herself as the victim, the brilliant businesswoman undermined by jealousy, and some people believed her, but not everyone. Because, while Natalie was busy playing the wronged CEO, I was running a company. Under my leadership, Carter Tech didn't just survive, it thrived. Clients who had been skeptical of Natalie's leadership returned. Developers who had been feeling sidelined under her reign stepped up, and revenue, it soared. I didn't just keep Carter Tech alive, I rebuilt it. Stronger, smarter, better. And Natalie, she faded. She tried to start her own consulting firm, but without Carter Tech's success backing her name, it never gained traction. She bounced between tech startups, never quite fitting in, always reaching for the same power she had once held. I saw her at a few industry events. She never approached me, and I never approached her, because we both knew she had lost. Not just the company, not just the power, but the one thing she had always underestimated, me. 1 year later, Carter Tech had tripled in value. Dad officially retired, finally understanding that his golden child had nearly destroyed his legacy. We saw each other at holidays, polite but distant. The wounds were too deep, too raw, and honestly, that was okay, because I had found peace, not just in my success, but in the knowledge that I had done what needed to be done, that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone, it's about rising so high that they have no choice but to see their own mistakes. And Natalie? She had plenty of time to reflect. 1 year after taking full control of Carter Tech, I stood in my office, looking out over the city skyline. The company was mine, and under my leadership, we had tripled in value. The success was undeniable. Investors who once hesitated now lined up. New partnerships formed. Our software, my software, became an industry standard. But more than that, I had built a company that truly valued the people behind it. Developers, engineers, designers. They weren't just names on a payroll anymore. They were part of something bigger, and they knew it, because I knew what it felt like to be pushed aside. I would never let that happen again. Natalie faded from the industry. After her failed attempts at starting a consulting firm, she took a job with a mid-level Silicon Valley startup. I heard through the grapevine that she struggled. She wasn't the CEO. She wasn't the face of the company. She was just another executive, replaceable. For someone like Natalie, that was the real defeat. The last time I saw her was at an industry gala. She was there as part of her new company's delegation. I was there as a keynote speaker. She spotted me from across the room, but we didn't acknowledge each other. And honestly, that was fine. We weren't enemies. We weren't sisters. We were just two people who used to know each other. Dad stayed retired. He never apologized. Not outright. But one evening, months after he stepped away from the company, he came to visit me at my office. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking around the space that had once been his. "You've done well," he said finally. I studied him for a long moment. "Thank you," I said. That was it. No grand reconciliation, no heart-to-heart, just an unspoken understanding. He finally saw me. That was enough. Mom and I stayed close. She never picked sides. She never tried to fix things. She just listened. One night, as we sat together on her back porch, she asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I thought about that for a long time. Regret? For standing up for myself? No. For proving that I was more than just the quiet one? No. For how it all fell apart? Maybe. But the truth was, it had to happen. Natalie and Dad would have taken everything from me if I had let them. I didn't start the war. I just ended it. The story spread. People in the industry talked. Rachel Carter? The one who outmaneuvered her sister? The one who built Carter Tech from nothing? They never finished the sentence. They didn't need to. My success spoke for itself. And then, one day, an invitation landed in my inbox. It was from Natalie's old business school. They wanted me to be a guest speaker at their graduation ceremony. The topic, Hidden Strengths, the Power of Underestimated Leaders. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Then, slowly, I smiled. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was that people like me, the ones who are ignored, underestimated, pushed aside, we don't just survive, we rise. And when we do, there's no stopping us. Story 2. The bell finally pierced the monotone, and the classroom erupted into a symphony of shrieks and locker slams. I, Emily, reveled in the controlled chaos. It had been my reality for the past 15 years, ever since I graduated with a teaching degree and a head full of idealism. My parents, bless their practical hearts, had urged me towards a stable career, accounting, maybe law, but the thought of spending my days hunched over numbers or arguing legalese sent shivers down my spine. "Miss Evans? Miss Evans?" A small hand tugged at my sleeve. I looked down to see Mia, a wisp of a girl with bright, curious eyes, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Yes, Mia? Can I stay after school again today? I finished all my homework and I really want to talk about that book you mentioned." A smile tugged at my lips. Mia was one of those rare students who devoured knowledge like candy. Most afternoons, she'd linger after class, peppering me with questions about everything from black holes to the intricacies of Shakespearean sonnets. "Sure, kiddo," I said, ruffling her hair, "but on one condition. We grab a healthy snack first. No heroics can happen on an empty stomach." She giggled, her smile infectious. "Deal." The school day ended with a chorus of goodbyes, and Mia bounced towards the front door, searching for her usual ride. Today, however, it wasn't her mom waiting, but a man I hadn't seen before. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Hey, Mia," he boomed, crouching down to her level. "Ready to ditch this place?" Mia squealed with delight and launched herself into his arms. "Uncle Alex! This is Miss Evans, my favorite teacher!" Alex extended a hand towards me. "Alex Miller, nice to meet you. Mia talks about you all the time." His handshake was firm, his eyes holding mine for a beat longer than necessary. A blush crept up my neck, and I mumbled a greeting. "So, Miss Evans," Alex continued, a playful glint in his eye, "you must be some kind of superhero to keep this little tornado focused all day." Mia giggled, and I found myself smiling back. "She's a bright one, that's for sure. A pleasure to have in class." Over the next few weeks, Alex became a regular fixture in the afternoon pickup routine. We'd chat briefly, the awkwardness slowly giving way to comfortable conversations. He was funny, intelligent, and talked about things beyond the usual kid-related topics. One afternoon, when Mia was engrossed in a book I'd loaned her, Alex lingered after the bell. "Listen, Miss Evans," he started hesitantly. "I know this might seem crazy, but would you maybe like to grab coffee sometime? Not with Mia, of course. Just us." My heart skipped a beat. Sure," I stammered, surprised by how quickly the answer tumbled out. That coffee turned into dinner, then drinks, then stolen moments whenever our schedules allowed. We were falling fast, caught in a whirlwind of stolen glances and late-night texts. A year later, Alex slid a diamond ring onto my finger, his eyes mirroring the joy in mine. We married in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. My parents, initially hesitant about the whirlwind romance, were won over by Alex's easy charm. Life seemed perfect. I gained a loving husband, a kind and supportive mother-in-law, and a rambunctious niece, Mia, who spent most weekends at our place. Mia's mom, Alex's sister, Jessica, was another story entirely. With fiery red hair and a penchant for tight skirts, Jessica cut a figure of chaos. Most evenings, Alex would field frantic calls from her, usually ending with him rolling his eyes and muttering about another man crisis. Jessica, in turn, barely tolerated me. Every visit was punctuated by backhanded compliments about my boring life choices and envious jabs at our family. One night, after a particularly scathing remark about my old-fashioned values, I finally snapped. "Alex!" I hissed after Jessica flounced out the door. "Mia needs more stability. Can't you see that? That woman wouldn't know responsibility if it bit her in the butt." Alex scowled. "She's my sister." Frustration bubbled over. "And Mia's your niece. How long are you going to pretend it's all sunshine and rainbows? That girl needs a real parent, not a walking party trick." Alex stormed out, leaving me fuming in the living room. This wasn't the first time we'd argued about Jessica, and it wouldn't be the last. A small seed of worry had taken root in my mind, a worry that would soon blossom into a full-blown storm. A few months after the wedding bliss settled, it was time for the grown-up talk. We sat at the kitchen table, the remnants of takeout scattered around us. "Alex," I began, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We need to talk about finances." He sighed, pushing back his chair. "Finances? What's the deal, honey? We agreed on a shared account, remember? 50-50. It seems like you haven't been contributing much lately." My words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation. Alex's brow furrowed. "Yeah, well, things came up. Jessica's going through a rough patch again, needs some help with Mia and all." Again, my frustration simmered. "Alex, we can't keep bailing her out every other month. We have bills to pay, groceries to buy. Look, Jessica's family. I gotta help her out, all right?" His voice was laced with a defensive edge. "And what about our family?" I retorted, my voice rising a notch. "Isn't Mia our family too? You're basically paying for their meals with our money." Alex slammed his fist on the table, making me jump. "Don't you get it, Emily? They need it more than we do. You keep the damn house clean. That's your contribution. Stop nagging about every dime." The anger in his voice startled me. This wasn't the easygoing Alex I married. This was a man with a secret and a growing resentment towards me. I swallowed the lump in my throat, refusing to be bullied. "That's not fair, Alex. We agreed on a system, and you're breaking it." He scoffed. "Life happens, honey. Deal with it." With that, he stormed out, leaving me alone in the cold silence of the kitchen. The takeout tasted like ash in my mouth. Alex's outburst confirmed the gnawing suspicion in my gut. Something wasn't right with Jessica's rough patch. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. The next few months were a blur. Alex stopped contributing altogether. Every time I brought it up, he'd brush me off with a flimsy excuse or a snide remark. The bills started piling up. I dipped into my savings, then resorted to using my own salary to keep the house afloat. It felt like I was single-handedly supporting a family that wasn't even mine. The worst part, Alex didn't seem to care. He continued to spend his evenings glued to his phone, taking calls from Jessica and disappearing for hours on end. The man I loved, the man who promised a future together, was slowly becoming a stranger. His secrets created a widening chasm between us. Months crawled by, each day a monotonous echo of the last. Alex's absences grew longer, his excuses flimsier. He'd vanish for entire evenings, his phone perpetually on silent. When he did grace us with his presence, it was a fleeting hello and a quick goodbye. His attention glued to his phone like a lifeline. Family dinners at my in-laws became a painful charade. Alex, a ghost at his own table, would mumble half-hearted greetings before disappearing into whispered phone conversations on the patio. My mother-in-law, bless her perceptive heart, would shoot me concerned glances, her silence speaking volumes. One night, after another empty silence settled over our dinner plates, I snapped. Alex, barely acknowledging my presence, shoved his food around the plate with a restless energy that made my skin crawl. "Alex," I said, my voice tight with frustration, "we need to talk." He glanced up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "About what, honey? About you? About us? About where the hell you are all the time?" The words tumbled out, a dam bursting after months of pent-up emotions. Alex sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. Look, I'm swamped at work. It's a demanding time, all right? Work? I scoffed, disbelief burning in my throat. You haven't worked a single late shift in months. What's really going on, Alex? He pushed back from the table, his face hardening. This isn't up for discussion. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I challenged, my voice rising a notch. Because right now, all I understand is that you're a stranger living in my house. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex stared at me, his jaw clenched, then turned on his heel and stormed out. I sank back in my chair, the weight of his indifference crushing me. Weeks crawled by, each one a silent testament to Alex's absence. He became a phantom, haunting the edges of my life with unanswered calls and texts. One morning, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was alone. Divorce papers, stark white against the worn kitchen table, confirmed my abandonment. Anger warred with despair. His new lover's taunting voice echoed in my ears, a cruel reminder of my shattered dreams. Fleeing the suffocating silence of our apartment, I sought refuge at my mother-in-law's house. Rita, bless her kind heart, welcomed me with open arms, her silent understanding a balm to my wounded soul. Little Mia, her eyes wide with worry, clung to me, a small but powerful reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. Fueled by a fierce determination to protect Mia and secure our future, I sought legal counsel. Brenda Miller, a lawyer with a reputation as sharp as her stilettos, listened intently as I poured out my story. With the help of a gruff, world-weary private investigator, we unearthed the truth. Jessica, my supposed sister-in-law, was a master manipulator, using Alex as a pawn in her greedy game. She'd spun a web of lies, exploiting her brother, her daughter, even her own parents, all for the promise of wealth and a life of comfort. Armed with damning evidence, recordings of Jessica's callous confessions, transcripts of her twisted schemes, I confronted the family. The truth exploded in the tense atmosphere of the dining room, shattering the facade of normalcy. Jessica's mask of victimhood slipped, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. Alex, finally seeing his sister's true colors, was left reeling in shame and disbelief. The fallout was swift and brutal. Jessica, her manipulative schemes laid bare, lost custody of Mia. The courts, recognizing the depth of her deceit, intervened to protect the innocent. Alex, faced with the consequences of his betrayal, was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. And me? I stood tall, battered but unbroken. The pain of betrayal was a bitter taste in my mouth, but it no longer defined me. I had found my strength, a resilience forged in the fires of adversity. Life, however, had more surprises in store. Rita and John, my former in-laws, called me to a meeting, their faces etched with a mix of sadness and resolve. "We've changed the will," John stated, his voice gruff with emotion. "The house, the savings, everything goes to you and Mia." Shock and confusion washed over me. "But why?" I stammered, unable to comprehend their generosity. Rita reached out, her hand warm and reassuring. "You opened our eyes, Emily," she said softly. "We see Alex for who he truly is now, but more importantly, we see you. You and Mia, you're the family we have left. You've been there for us, for Mia, and that's worth more than any blood tie. And so, we forged a new path." The house, once filled with the echoes of betrayal and deceit, now resonated with Mia's laughter and the comforting rhythm of our shared life. We were an unlikely trio, bound by the threads of heartbreak and resilience. Rita, finding solace in raising Mia, rediscovered her own strength. Mia, surrounded by love and stability, blossomed under our care. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of battles fought and won, but they no longer defined us. We were survivors, moving forward, together, towards a future filled with hope and the enduring power of love. The journey wouldn't be easy, but we had each other, and that was all that mattered.